Imagine standing on a quiet pier about an hour's drive south of Perth. The coastline here is legendary, pristine, turquoise water, and a sense of isolation that feels like the edge of the world. But lately, that peace has been broken by the sight of something massive in obsidian black cutting through the waves. The USS Vermont, one of the most advanced nuclear-powered attack submarines in the world. As it docks at the Sterling Naval Base, there's an undeniable air of pride among the officials on the shore. They talk about the billions of dollars pouring into the local economy, the thousands of jobs, and the deep-down satisfaction of finally becoming a major player in Indo-Pacific security. To them, this steel giant is a shield, the long-awaited proof that Australia is no longer just a spectator in global power politics. You talk to someone like Sophie McNeil, the local representative, and the protection starts to look like a target. She describes a beautiful coastline being transformed into a massive foreign military hub, and suddenly, the giddy excitement about new infrastructure is replaced by a quiet dread about radioactive waste and the loss of a quiet life. The most striking contradiction, however, comes from the very top of the old guard. You have former prime ministers like Malcolm Turnbull not cheering from the sidelines, but sounding a frantic alarm. He doesn't see a shield, he sees a huge sacrifice of sovereignty. The logic is jarring. Australia is spending $368 billion and inviting foreign nuclear fleets into its backyard, all to gain control over a future conflict. Yet in doing so, they might be losing the power to choose whether they even join that conflict at all. It leaves you with a haunting question. Has Australia just built itself a high-tech fortress, or has it simply volunteered to be the front line in someone else's war?
It creates such a visceral image, doesn't it, Trask?
Yes.
You have this, pristine, almost untouched coastline, and then this obsidian black machine of war just slicing through it. It really it encapsulates the whole tension we're looking at today.
We're unpacking the ITAR steel, and specifically, we're zooming right in on Pillar 1, which is the big one, the acquisition of these nuclear-powered submarines.
Right, and just to be clear for you listening, this isn't just another government defense contract.
Right.
We're not talking about upgrading a few radios here. This is the single largest public investment in Australian history. We are talking about a projected cost of $368 billion.
That number, it's so big, it almost loses all meaning. It's like an astronomical figure.
It creates its own gravity, you could say.
Yeah. To give that some scale for you, that figure dwarfs the national broadband network. It dwarfs the major tunnel projects in Sydney and Melbourne combined. I mean, it is just a monumental stack of cash.
Exactly. And our mission today is to move past the press releases, past the talking points. We've got a massive stack of material here. Risk analyses, policy papers from places like Marcellus Policy Analysis, critiques from former officials like Turnbull and Gareth Evans, and some really deep industrial reports.
And they all seem to paint a very different picture from the glossy brochures we see.
A very different picture. So we need to examine the industrial reality, what we're calling the sovereignty trap, and the whole geopolitical chess game that might just make this deal, as one of our sources puts it, too big to succeed.
Too big to succeed. I mean, that's a terrifying phrase when you're spending that kind of money, isn't it? So let's unpack this systematically. I think we have to start with the most practical question of all. Can we actually build these things? Because there's this whole narrative out there that this is going to jumpstart a golden age of Australian manufacturing.
That's the promise, the jobs and growth promise that we always hear. But the reality on the ground, I mean, the gritty industrial reality, it tells a very, very different story.
I want to bring in a narrative here that really stuck with me from the research. It's a first-hand account. Let's just call the guy Mark. So Mark is a senior mechanical engineer in Adelaide, a guy who spent 20 years in local manufacturing.
Right, so he's one of the people who actually knows how to bolt things together.
Exactly. The guy with grease under his fingernails.
Now, when the IUKUS announcement hit the news with that staggering $368 billion price tag, Mark, he didn't cheer. He didn't pop the champagne.
He was skeptical.
He looked at his empty workshop and just felt this cold sense of irony. He told his colleagues that while the government was dreaming of these nuclear-powered futures in the 2040s, his own firm couldn't find 5 qualified welders to finish a local bridge project.
Wow. That is a devastating disconnect. A bridge versus a nuclear submarine.
I saw a post he wrote where he described this talent gap, not as some abstract statistic, but as a funeral for local industry.
A funeral. Yeah. He's watched his youngest, most brilliant apprentices pack their bags and move to Singapore, move to Shenzhen, because, as he puts it, that's where things actually get built now. To Mark, this whole submarine project felt like like a grand architectural plan for a cathedral being handed to a village that had completely forgotten how to bake bricks.
A cathedral in a village that's forgotten how to bake bricks. That metaphor is incredibly potent because it just perfectly highlights the difference between what some policy analysts call procedural grandiosity, the big political announcements, the speeches, the ribbon cuttings, and the result-oriented reality. You can't just decree a nuclear industry into existence if you don't have the bricks. And you certainly can't do it if you've forgotten how to make them.
And the bricks in this case are people, right? It's the skilled workforce.
The sources we're looking at, particularly these deep risk analysis papers, they highlight an extreme risk rating for workforce capability. Extreme. Australia currently has 0 nuclear qualified maritime workforce. 0. To grow a cadre of nuclear welders, physicists, safety regulators, that takes decades. It's a generational project.
I think we need to pause on that. Why is nuclear welding so different from regular welding? Mark mentioned he couldn't find welders for a bridge. Is a submarine really that much harder?
It's exponentially harder. I mean, think about the environment it operates in.
Right.
A bridge just sits there in the air. A submarine hull operates in one of the most hostile environments on Earth outside of maybe outer space. It has to withstand immense pressure changes, compressing and expanding every single time it dives deep and resurfaces.
So any little flaw would be magnified.
Magnified catastrophically. A single microscopic hairline fracture, a tiny bubble in a weld that you can't even see with the naked eye, can lead to catastrophic hull failure.
Like the Thresher disaster. That's what comes to mind.
Exactly. In the U.S., this is all governed by the SubSafe program, which was literally born out of that tragedy. The certification required creates this culture of absolute perfection that takes decades to instill. You don't just send a guy to a 6-week TAFE course and say, okay, you're good, go weld the reactor compartment.
And Mark's point about his apprentices leaving is so crucial here. If you don't have the ecosystem now, if the talent is actively leaving, how do you bridge the gap to the 2040s?
You probably don't. Or the risk is you end up cannibalizing talent from other critical projects.
Stealing from Peter to pay Paul.
We have the Hunter-class frigate program running at the same time. If you pull all your best engineers, all your best project managers to the submarine program because the pay is better or the prestige is higher, your surface fleet suffers.
So it's a zero-sum game.
It is when your talent pool is this shallow. One source described it as Australia attempting a Tier 1 nuclear stewardship role with a Tier 3 industrial base.
That's Tier 3.
Well, it's not an insult. It's a metric of industrial complexity. Tier 1 implies you can do the whole cycle. Design it, build it, maintain it, and dispose of it. Tier 3 implies you are largely just assembling components that were designed and probably built elsewhere.
Okay.
And this isn't just an Australian problem. This is where we need to zoom out a bit to the global context. We always hear that we're leaning on our great allies, the United States and the UK, to help us cross this gap.
Right. That's the optimal pathway they talk about.
Right.
We buy some Virginia-class subs from the US first, then we build the new IU-class ones with the UK.
But here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, alarming. The United States has its own industrial crisis. The U.S. Navy has stated on the record they need to produce 2.33 Virginia-class submarines per year.
2.33.
Yes, that's what they need to meet their own fleet requirements, plus the IUKUS commitment to Australia.
Okay, 2.3. So what are they actually producing?
Somewhere between 1.2 and 1.4.
So they're barely making half of what they need.
Correct. They are just treading water. American shipyards are floundering. They are struggling to find labor. They are struggling with supply chains. The peace dividend of the 1990s saw a lot of these specialized shipyards close or consolidate.
You can't just flip a switch and turn it back on.
And this brings us to a statistic from a leaked U.S. Navy briefing slide that it absolutely floored me when I first saw it. The slide was comparing Chinese shipbuilding capacity to the United States. It showed that China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times greater than that of the United States.
Wait, 232%?
No, 232 times.
Times.
As in multiply by 232. The numbers were 23.25 million tons of capacity for China versus less than 100,000 tons for the U.S.
Even possible. 232 times.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's the reality of a nation that has become the world's factory versus a nation that has, largely deindustrialized. China doesn't just build warships, they build everything. Container ships, bulk carriers, oil tankers.
So the commercial base supports the military one.
It creates this incredibly deep ecosystem. One report I read said China creates 3 jobs in the surrounding economy for every one direct shipbuilding role. Steel workers, accountants, engineers, you name it. It deepens their entire industrial base. Meanwhile, the U.S. is struggling just to keep its existing fleet afloat.
That ties right back to Mark's story about his apprentices going to Shenzhen. The ecosystem is there. The work is there.
And it matters so much because of something called industrial regeneration. In a conflict, ships get damaged. Submarines need repairs. They need to be replaced. Right now, 33%, 1/3 of the entire U.S. attack submarine fleet is sitting in maintenance or just waiting for maintenance. They can't get them back in the water.
So 1/3 of their fleet is effectively a paperweight at any given time.
Because the dry docks are full, the specialized parts aren't there, and the workforce is stretched to its absolute limit. So if Australia is betting its entire national security on a supply chain that is already breaking under its own weight, are we buying a shield or are we just buying a ticket to a waiting room?
We're talking about spending $368 billion to join a queue that isn't moving. But let's, for a moment, just assume the magic happens. We find the welders, the U.S. sorts out its shipyards, the boats arrive. That just leads us to the second massive hurdle in our sources, the sovereignty trap.
This is the political and strategic cost that comes attached to that very expensive hardware.
And to look at this, we have to move from the workshop to the living room. I was reading a series of interviews with residents in Rockingham, Western Australia, right near the naval base, HMAS Sterling. And one woman's story, let's call her Elena, really stood out to me.
Rockingham is ground zero for this whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So Elena has lived near the base for decades. She's used to the Navy. She's used to the quiet hum of activity. But recently, she says she's felt like a ghost in her own town. She described the influx of foreign contractors and this new submarine rotational force west as a slow motion occupation of her peace of mind.
Slow motion occupation.
I mean, try to imagine her standing on the beach, looking out at that same water where the USS Vermont docked. She has this sudden realization that her home has been redesignated. It's no longer just a quiet Navy town.
It's a target.
It's a high-priority target in a nuclear exchange she never voted for. She expressed this deep, unsettling feeling that Australia's sovereignty was being traded away for a seat at a table where the bigger players hold all the cards. To her, integration felt more like disappearance.
That feeling Elena has, that sense of disappearance, is what strategists call sovereign control risk. And our sources back her up on this entirely. It's a technical and legal reality.
How so? What are the mechanics of that?
It comes down to this concept of integrated deterrence. That's the buzzword the U.S. uses. But what it practically means is technical lock-in. These Virginia-class submarines and the future SSN AUKUS boats are essentially black boxes of technology.
Black boxes.
Yeah, they rely completely on U.S. combat systems, U.S. software, and U.K. reactor modules.
Meaning we can't fix them ourselves or even understand them.
Meaning we can't operate them, repair them, or even fully understand them without explicit foreign permission. There are these really strict regulations called ITAR, International Traffic and Arms Regulations. It's an intellectual property law.
So,
it means Australia cannot simply decide to deploy these boats wherever it wants if the U.S. disagrees, because the U.S. controls the logistical and technical leash. They control the software updates, the spare parts, everything.
So it's like buying a Tesla, but the dealership back in California can turn it off remotely if you drive somewhere they don't like.
A $10 billion nuclear-powered Tesla loaded with Tomahawk missiles. And there's a quote in the sources from Kurt Campbell, who is a major figure in U.S. Asia policy. They often call him the Asia czar.
Right.
He was speaking to some European officials, and he told them that Ajaya was about getting Australia off the fence.
Off the fence? That implies we were undecided before, that we had a choice.
His next line was even more blunt. He said, "We have them locked in now for the next 40 years.
Oh, locked in? That doesn't sound like a partnership of equals. That sounds like a capture.
It suggests that the ambiguity of Australia's strategic position, the sovereign ability to say no to joining a foreign war, has been removed. Former Foreign Minister Gareth Evans points this out very clearly in the transcripts we've seen.
What does he say?
He argues that integrated deterrence effectively means Australia must join a U.S. war over Taiwan. There's no longer a choice.
Because if the U.S. is launching nuclear submarines out of Perth to fight a war with China, we are involved whether we've declared war or not. The base itself is a participant.
You cannot host a belligerent's primary attack fleet in your ports and then claim you're neutral. Rockingham, Elena's home, becomes a forward operating base for the U.S. Navy. If the base is a target, the country is a participant. Story.
And that brings us right back to that haunting question from the intro. Fortress Australia or forward operating base? It really seems the forward operating base side of that coin is winning.
And we haven't even touched on the other part of Elena's fear, the really long-term part, the nuclear waste.
Right, the whole nuclear stewardship issue. This is the stuff that glows in the dark for thousands of years.
Australia has agreed to take on and store high-level radioactive waste from these submarines. But we have no regulatory framework for it.
Right.
We have no experience with it. And there's a really critical distinction here that we need to explain. It's the difference between the French submarines we canceled, the ATAR class, and the AUKUS submarines we bought.
Yeah, we'll refresh our memory on that. Yeah. The French deal, that was based on a nuclear design, but we were getting conventional diesel-electric ones, right?
Correct. But the French nuclear naval reactors that design was based on, the Submarine class, they use low-enriched uranium, LEU. This is similar to what you'd find in a civil nuclear power plant. It's dangerous, obviously, but it's a known quantity. It's manageable.
Okay, and the American and British ones?
The AUKUS boats use highly enriched uranium, HEU. Weapons grade, 95% enriched.
Wait, weapons grade, as in the material for a nuclear bomb?
Exactly. It is the stuff of nightmares for non-proliferation experts around the world. Because these reactors are designed to be sealed for the entire life of the submarine, say 30 years, they have to use incredibly potent fuel.
Okay.
But by accepting this, Australia is creating a massive intergenerational liability. We are importing the most dangerous substance on Earth with no permanent place to put it and no laws to govern it, all to run submarines we might not even fully control.
So it creates a situation where legally and physically we are tied to the US and UK nuclear ecosystems forever. We can't just cancel the subscription down the line because we're literally holding their radioactive waste.
It's a sovereign straitjacket sealed with nuclear waste.
So, okay, we have an industrial base that can't build it and a sovereignty deal that effectively locks us in. Okay. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe the threat from China is so great and the strategic value of these subs is so high that we just have to swallow the cost and the risk.
That is the government's argument to a T, that the security environment has deteriorated so much that only the best of the best will do. But that leads us directly to our third segment, the geopolitical gamble. Is this even the right strategy to solve the problem we think we have?
I heard a fascinating perspective on this from a logistics analyst, Leon. Julian spends his days looking at satellite imagery of global ports, shipping lanes, industrial hubs. He's a numbers guy, a material reality guy, not a military strategist.
The view from the logistics chain is often more honest than the view from the war room. It deals in tons and shipping containers, not rhetoric.
Exactly. And he told a story about a moment of clarity he had. He was comparing the construction timelines of the AUKUS submarines against the satellite imagery showing the expansion of megaports in East Asia. He described it as watching a man try to build a dam with a silver spoon while a river of industrial output was already flooding the entire valley.
A dam with a silver spoon.
Julian's point was that the $368 billion isn't just money. It represents diminishing returns in a world where economic gravity has already shifted. He saw a map online that colored regions by material output, and he had this realization that the whole containment strategy, this idea that a few submarines can box China in, was essentially a paper wall.
Julian has really hit on something that military planners can often miss, the sheer velocity of China's infrastructure development and material output.
He called it a realization that this kind of military posturing is a 20th century solution to a 21st century economic eclipse.
And let's look at the tyranny of distance here, because it supports Julian's view completely. There is a geography problem that no amount of money can fix. We tend to think of Perth as being in the region, it's in our neighborhood, but submarines based in Perth are essentially as far away from the Taiwan Strait as submarines based in Hawaii.
I think we all tend to assume, because Perth is on the Indian Ocean and it sort of looks up towards Asia on a map, that it's closer.
It's not close. It is thousands and thousands of kilometers away. A submarine traveling at a reasonable, sustainable speed takes nearly 2 weeks to get from HMAS Sterling to the Taiwan Strait.
2 weeks?
Which means for every boat you have, it spends a huge chunk of its operational life just commuting to work. So the argument that we're creating this unique strategic advantage by basing them in Perth is shaky at best. We are essentially building a second Hawaii for the U.S. Navy, but at Australian expense.
So we're paying for their commute.
Yeah.
And Julian mentioned the economic gravity. We've got some data from the Lowy Institute on this, don't we?
The Lowy Institute report, Revising Down the Rise of China, actually argues that China's economic growth is slowing down. It projects maybe 2–3% growth by 2050 due to things like an aging population and productivity headwinds.
Well, isn't that good news for the containment strategy? If they're slowing down, maybe we have a chance to catch up, or for the submarines to have an impact.
That's the logical trap. Even with slow growth, China will be a massive, massive economic bloc. The sheer mass is already there. The momentum is there. The idea that maybe 8 submarines, which won't all be in service until the late 2040s, can somehow deter or contain an economy of that size is exactly what Julian meant by diminishing returns.
It's like trying to stop a glacier with a roadblock. The glacier might be moving slower than it was before, but it's still a glacier. Its mass is undeniable.
Exactly. And the opportunity cost is the other side of this coin. $368 billion. The sources repeatedly mention that this money could fund our entire transition to green energy. It could revolutionize our health and education systems. The critique is that AUKUS is a massive distraction from the actual tangible threats of the 21st century, like climate change, which are non-military.
So we're preparing for a 1940s-style naval battle, capital ships, big torpedoes, while the planet heats up and the economic center of gravity shifts completely, regardless of how many submarines we have.
That is the geopolitical gamble. We are betting the house on a very specific type of conflict, fought in a very specific way, with a partner who is industrially strained to contain a rival who, to use Julian's metaphor, has already flooded the valley.
Okay, so we've covered the industrial illusion. We probably can't build it. The sovereignty trap, we might not even own it. The geopolitical gamble, it might not even work anyway. This is, well, frankly, it's pretty depressing. Is there a way out of this? Or are we just doomed to watch this slow-motion train wreck unfold for the next 40 years?
Well, this is where it gets constructive. The sources don't just complain. They do offer a pivot, a plan B, if you will.
Okay. Because I think we could all use a plan B right about now.
It starts with a paper from the Marcellus Policy Analysis that's titled, Too Big to Succeed.
Which is a clever play on too big to fail, I assume.
Right. And they argue that AUKUS Pillar 1, the submarines themselves, is the problem. It's too expensive, it's too slow, and it's industrially impossible for us. But Pillar 2, the technology sharing agreement, is actually incredibly valuable.
Okay, refresh my memory. Pillar 2 is the other stuff, right? The AI, quantum computing, hypersonic missiles.
Yes. All the high-tech, software-heavy, next-generation side of the alliance. The argument is, shelve the submarine sale. Stop pretending we can build a nuclear boat-building industry in Adelaide from scratch. Instead, double down on Pillar 2.
So focus on the tech.
Share the research, share the electronic warfare capabilities, share the quantum encryption, and you don't mortgage the entire country's future for a few very expensive hulls.
But we still need ships. Right. We are an island nation. If we cancel the Adelaide build, what do we do for a navy? We can't just have nothing.
And the sources point to an obvious but for some reason overlooked solution. Asian shipbuilding.
You mean our other allies, Japan and South Korea?
Exactly. Remember those shipbuilding stats from earlier? China has about 50% of the global market. Who has most of the rest? South Korea has 29%. Japan has 13%. The U.S., remember, has 0.1%.
So instead of trying to force a Tier 3 industry in Adelaide to build Tier 1 boats from scratch over 30 years, we just go to the allies who actually know how to build ships efficiently right now.
It aligns with what strategists call internal balancing. You build actual real capacity by working with the people who have the dry docks, the steel mills, and the welders today. It's faster, it's cheaper, and it doesn't leave you waiting in line for American shipyards to clear their decades-long backlog.
And Japan and South Korea make great subs.
They make some of the best conventional submarines in the world. They're quieter in many situations, they're cheaper, and they require much smaller crews than the nuclear giants.
As it feels like we're trying to reinvent the wheel in Adelaide, when our friends in Seoul and Tokyo are already driving Ferraris.
And there's one more layer to this alternative strategy. It's called the echidna strategy.
I love the name. Spiky. Hard to attack.
Spiky. Hard to swallow. The idea is a denial strategy. See, these huge nuclear submarines are all about power projection. They are offensive weapons designed to go far away to threaten someone else's coast. But if your primary goal is just to defend Australia, you don't need to go to the Taiwan Strait. You need to stop people from coming here.
So instead of a few big, expensive spears, you become a porcupine.
the technology. You focus on thousands of anti-ship missiles, smart sea mines, long-range drones, and uncrewed submersibles. The small, smart, and cheap approach.
And the goal is deterrence through denial.
If the goal is to defend Australia, you make the continent a porcupine. You make it impossible for an adversary to approach your coast without taking massive, unacceptable losses. It's cheaper, it creates far less sovereign risk because you aren't dependent on foreign nuclear tech to run it, and it's much, much harder for an enemy to target than 3 or 4 big, expensive submarines. You can sink a submarine. It's very hard to sink a swarm of 1,000 drones.
It seems like such a logical, pragmatic pivot. Why aren't we doing it? Why are we so fixated on the big, black, expensive boats?
Because of the cathedral, the political allure of the mega project, the ribbon cutting, the projection of great power status. An echidna strategy isn't sexy. It doesn't get you a photo op with the US president on a pier in San Diego, but it might actually keep you safe.
We started on that pier south of Perth, watching the USS Vermont cut through the water. We've traveled through the empty workshops of Adelaide with Mark. We've stood in the anxious living rooms of Rockingham with Elena. And we've looked at the global logistical maps with Julian.
And the picture that emerges is one of a nation striving for relevance. Australia wants to matter. It wants to be secure in a changing world. So it bought the most expensive, most complex symbol of security available, the nuclear submarine.
The cathedral.
The cathedral. But in doing so, it seems to have ignored the reality of its own industrial village. It ignored the voices of its own people who are now feeling less secure, not more. And it ignored the shifting economic tides that make such a purchase questionable at best.
The irony is just palpable, isn't it? We spent $368 billion to buy control, but everything in these sources suggests we've bought the exact opposite.
We've bought dependency, we've chained ourselves to a declining industrial power, the U.S. shipyards, in order to manage a rising one China. And in the process, we might find ourselves holding the bill for a high-tech fortress that no longer guards the right gates.
The quest for the ultimate weapon might have actually created the ultimate vulnerability for us.
And it leaves us wondering, if the true measure of security in the 21st century is resilience, agility, and economic strength, did we just spend a generation's worth of wealth on a suit of armor that's too heavy to move in?